Welcome to another edition of Business Africa. I'm your host, Afrolake Oinloye. The top stories this week. Moonshot 2025 closes in Lagos. Nigeria champions drive to increase intra-continental digital trade. From copying Silicon Valley to creating for Africa, YouTube's AB Atawadi urges founders to build small, intentional solutions as the EU ramps up support for local tech innovation. Experts call for a unified African IP framework as creators lose billions. The AfCFTA protocol is seen as key to unlocking the continent's $17 billion creative industry. Trade between African countries account for just 5% of the continent's digital trade, but Nigeria aims to change that. At Moonshot 2025, the country's Trade and Investment Minister announced sweeping reforms to help African businesses scale across the borders.
The Moonshot 2025 event in Lagos spotlighted Africa's digital economic future. Nigeria's Trade Minister, Dr. Jumoke Oduole, unveiled bold reforms, including the national single window and a new trade facilitation portal to boost intra-African digital trade, which currently accounts for just 5%.
All the digital trade in Africa goes out of the continent. And so we see that as a 95% opportunity to trade with each other, to add value addition and to leverage across the continent for the growth of the continent. And so as digital trade co-champion for AfCFTA, we're the leaders from the forefront of making sure that African businesses, starting with Nigeria, are able to scale and thrive on the continent.
She pointed to regulatory gaps and the lack of trade intelligence as key barriers to cross-border commerce, challenges the government is tackling through training and policy alignment.
Training businesses on how to access that information, what to do with NAFDAC, what to do with customs, what to do with SON. Those are the things that our businesses need, and that's what we're delivering for them.
To ease logistics, the government also struck a flat-rate air freight deal with Ugandan Airlines, creating an air cargo corridor that slashes export costs to Uganda, Kenya, and South Africa by up to 75%. Together, these measures reflect the conference's strong collaboration and its concrete outcomes for Africa's digital economy.
To discuss the event's key achievements and strategic deals, we turn to Tomiwa Aladikomo, CEO of Big Cabal Media. Thank you for joining us on the show. Building momentum, what signs of growth did you see at Moonshot 2025, and why are you optimistic about Africa's tech ecosystem?
I think that there was significant external investor interest, signified by investors coming to Moonshot all the way from Japan, the US, across Europe, and across Africa. We had African investors from Egypt, from South Africa, Tunisia, Tanzania. We had founders coming from across the continent, showcasing really, really interesting work across a range of sectors. And so a question I got frequently was why all the exhibitors, probably 60 to 70% of the exhibitors were fintech. And I think that's where the heat has been in the past few years. But in terms of the startups doing interesting things, there are people trying to solve problems in property tech, in health, in education, in energy, clean and climate tech. And so I think what's exciting is the number of areas in which people are experimenting in, are building interesting businesses in, and the fact that there are investors interested in all of those spaces, and that so many investors were willing to come to Lagos, Nigeria to experience Moonshot by Tech Cabal, to meet startups operating in those spaces.
Now, beyond the event, how do you turn the conversations to real impact for startups and the ecosystem?
So we had the startups, we had investors all meeting. And what you really want to come out of a conference like this is for more investments in the areas that people are interested in, is for investors to take a more enlightened approach to what the challenges in the ecosystem are, the range of various regulators who got to engage with the people that they regulate to take feedback into their decision making. And so all of that may be a little bit less report driven, but is even more important perhaps in terms of driving progress is that a year from now, the startups in renewable energy that, met investors here have received funding, that the startups who are doing health and edu have moved forward based on the learnings that they made in this company, at this conference, that individuals who are thinking about starting companies have, or are early in their journey, have learned the lessons that improve their outcomes as business leaders over the course of this conference. And so I think a year from now, we will have a lot of stories to tell. And I will say just one last thing before I sign off, which is each year we get the stories, and we're going to be a bit more intentional about compiling them this time, of founders who met investors or who met business partners at Moonshot.
Which sectors, talent, or policies will drive Africa's tech growth, and how will Moonshot support that?
I think that you will continue to see people get smarter about where they put capital. You will continue to see our founders get smarter about what kind of problems they choose to solve. And also, the big topic of conversation at Moonshot this year was building for exit from day one. And so thinking, as you are receiving capital, how do I return this capital? Am I going to be listing on the local stock exchange? Am I going to be listing on an international stock exchange? And building very intentionally day by day. And I know that everybody says, you got to have your first pitch deck. This is how we're going to exit. But I think that with a more mature ecosystem, you have people who've gone through that, and they can get better advisors. They can get better line of sight on how to actually do it. And again, that's what gatherings like this are, to make sure you're meeting people who are a few steps ahead and can guide you through your journey. And so we hope we've helped that, and I think that it all bodes well for the future of the ecosystem.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
As Africa's tech ecosystem surges, industry leaders at Moonshot urge startups to move beyond copying global blueprints. They are encouraged to design solutions grounded in local realities.
The global tech world often follows the mantra of designing for billions, a playbook many African startups try to emulate. But Africa's tech challenge isn't just about scale. It's also about local innovation. YouTube's Director of Product Management, Ibia Tordi, challenged founders to focus on solving local realities first, rather than copying foreign models.
The key thing that I want to make sure we do not lose, which is we should not try to bring things that have worked elsewhere, right, and just drop them in Africa and hope they will work. I think what we need to do is figure out how to build for a very small focused group of people, get that working, and then now figure out how you can replicate that.
This vision needs global support. Hussein Jafar of D4D Hub Africa highlighted the European Union's backing through the Global Gateway strategy to help African startups scale their solutions.
We want to bring in our EU expertise, EU knowledge, EU private sector, EU investors to come into Africa to bring this support to the startups here and the environment of the not only the creative industry for which we are sponsored here today, but also all other industries such as, I see here there's a lot of fintechs and e-commerce industries.
As Atawadi says, Africa's tech future lies in starting small, building niche and intentional solutions and giving them time to grow, letting the right ideas scale up naturally while respecting local realities.
Africa's creative industries, from Afrobeat to Nollywood, are shaping global culture, yet billions in potential revenue remain trapped due to weak intellectual property frameworks. Stronger IP protection is needed to ensure creators are rewarded and the sector thrives.
Africa's creative economy is booming, set to reach $17 billion by 2030, driven by global sensations like Afrobeats and Nollywood. Yet experts warn that this cultural wealth remains largely untapped because of three major intellectual or IP failures. Without clear payment systems, creators aren't motivated to protect their work, and that discourages investors.
So for a lot of people, when there's lack of incentives to actually when there's a lack of incentives for them to register, protect their IP, they don't want to go through that trouble.
Many creators simply don't understand how IP works. They assume that creating something automatically secures their rights, But that's only the beginning.
People don't even understand what they've created or the rights that they control or how they can monetize or how they can be protected to ensure that what they've created adds value to them. So I think that there's a whole knowledge gap.
IP protection often ends at national borders, leaving creators vulnerable as their work circulates across countries. That's where the Africa Free Trade Agreement IP protocol comes in, aiming to harmonize laws across the continent.
Just because you have IP in Nigeria does not cover you in Ghana next door. We now have the Africa Free Trade Agreement. How are we cross-bordering our transactions and making sure that there's a uniformity? And I think that there's a strong case for IP harmonization across the board.
Experts say the solution lies in unity, creators and policymakers working together to build a flexible continent-wide IP framework that keeps pace with the digital age and finally unlocks Africa's creative goldmine.
That wraps up this edition of Business Africa. Thank you for watching. For more business stories and updates, stay tuned to Africanews or visit africanews.com. See you soon.